Hello and welcome to episode 11 of Christian's Political Talks. I am your host, Christian, and today we have two special guests. Our first special guest is the National President of the Asian Australian Lawyers Association and also the President of the Chinese Community Council of Australia. Now he is the Australian Citizens Party No.1 candidate for the Senate seats of New South Wales for the 2022 federal election, Mr. Kingsley Liu.
Hi, good evening, Christian. Happy to be here. Thank you for inviting us.
So our second special guest is the National Chairman for the Australian Citizens Party, and now she is the No.2 candidate for the Senate seats of New South Wales in the same party, Miss Ann Lawler. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you, Christian, and likewise, thank you for having us on.
So why don't we start off with you guys telling us a bit about yourself?
Right, I'll answer that first. Thanks, Anne. My background is in law and in engineering. Engineering, I first started off when I was younger. I was involved with power stations and in the electrical areas. I worked as a banker for some time, and then I finally ended up in law. So I do a lot of human rights, and particularly I work and represent for the more disadvantaged end of the community, those that are a bit more vulnerable, less well-heeled, and they usually have cases of oppression, and also cases against the Commonwealth and the state governments for various over various issues. So pleased to be in that area, and I deal a lot with the community because of that. So here I am, and I ended up in politics because of my involvement in the community.
So what about you, Anne?
Well, I probably haven't got as detailed a background as Kingsley has. I was just someone who went to year 10 at school. When I left school, I went to work in a bank as a teller, not as a banker. And then when I left there, I was married. I was having my first baby. And that's when my husband and I started a transport business in the Hunter Valley. And we've been operating that business ever since. So I think we're in about 48 years or something like that coming up. Wow. So that's quite some time. Yeah. I got involved with the Citizens Party in 1997. And because I grew up on a farm, dairy and crop farm, I had a connection to production. And I think when I first made a contact, or the Citizens Party contacted me, I was in my business, and they asked me a few questions about what my concerns were in regards to the economy, what was going on. And there was a lot of things that I was concerned about that didn't add up. And I started subscribing to publications, and it's just gone on from there, where once I started to realise why things were going wrong with the economy, then of course the next step is, well, what am I going to do about it? And that's why I've stood in every election since 1998 for their policies.
So, well, my next question is, well, you already answered it, Anne, but Kingsley, so why did you join the Australian Citizens Party?
Well, I had been involved in other parties, but my appetite fell out with those parties because it wasn't really getting to exactly what moved me. In life, we move with our ideals and what we really want to do in relationship to our community and our families. And it was the Citizens Party that attracted me. And so it is very, in a way, it's very progressive, and it's very serious about how it wants to transform and improve not only the economy, but its relationships with internationally, and it's with its neighbours.
So how did you guys end up becoming the candidates for the Senate seats for the Australian Citizens Party?
You go first, Kingsley.
Okay, well, I have been a seasoned candidate for another party, and I think that was, and I had through friends and through work colleagues, I had a growing relationship with various personalities in the Citizenship Party, and so after a number of conversations, and after a number of conversations, it just grew, the relationship grew and grew. So and it was just not so long ago that I decided this was the right time for me to pivot and move into an area which I feel much more aligned with. So the Citizenship Party's policies do appeal to me. And I think because it does the best for our communities.
And in my case, Christian, as I said, I've stood in every election since 1998. They have sometimes been as the House of Representatives candidate, or they've been the Senate. And the last couple of elections has been more towards the Senate, where we want to make sure that we've got enough candidates to stand as grouped, above the line. And we've got representation in all of the states and territories except for the ACT and Tasmania. So, and then we will have a sprinkling of candidates in House of Reps electorates as well.
So what would be your main policies you would help pass through if you got into federal parliament?
Well, I might go with that one because I think in terms of our priority at the moment is for it's always been national banking. And when I say national banking, it's a government owned and directed bank to be able to use for the benefit of the country. We've always looked in what mechanism can we use? And sometimes it changes. The depth of the crisis, the economic crisis the country is in has changed. Like, for instance, in 1998, when I was door knocking for the election then, talking about a global financial crisis in 1998 coming, right? And people thought, hang on a minute, you're off with the fairies, that's not going to happen. Well, 2007, 2008 proved that was wrong. And our policies, if they'd been adopted back then, we could have headed that off. So at the moment, the means to be able to get a national bank up and going is to use Australia Post. We've got post offices all around the country. We've got regional areas where they're being denied banking services because the banks are all closing. And we've got licensed post offices that are in danger of closing too because they're not viable. So we've got three things. We need public banking. We've got a means to do it, to be able to guarantee banking services right across the country and to be able to guarantee postal services. And also out of that, you then have access to cheap credit that can be available for local government, for local enterprise, and we've got policies written for that. And we've also got policies written for a national development bank and an infrastructure bank that can be linked into that. And Kingsley, you might like to say some more about that?
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. So we actually have the legislation ready to go to enact a public national bank. The thing about having a national public bank as opposed from commercial banks is that the operations and the relationships with to develop projects is rather different. With a commercial bank, the bank's aim is to create profits for shareholders, and it borrows on the international market at international rates. and then passes it on to customers at a spread. But with a national public bank, the government, through quantitative easing methods, is able to issue credit to build infrastructure. The infrastructure we're talking about, like water projects, high-speed rail, let's say the Iron Boomerang, which is a joining up the whole north of Australia through infrastructure to create a steel industry, for agriculture to go through seasonal ups and downs, to build infrastructure that is road, rail and ports. And having that in place, that builds an economy. You need infrastructure like that. Now, infrastructure like that doesn't create a yield as high as national ordinary commercial banks, but it's the sort of infrastructure and that you need to build an economy on, which will in turn create jobs, manufacturing, educational industries, and a flow of revenue that would come back into the government. That revenue will help build a budget it'll increase the size of the budget and then you'll have the ability for the government to better deal with cost of living issues like healthcare, education, social services. And that's the best way to build an economy. Otherwise, if it's based on commercial banking principles, then you run yourself into property bubbles, which are hand in hand with government incentives, and you're building a false economy in that direction.
So why should New South Wales vote number 1 for the Australian Citizens Party above the line? Or there's also the alternative in the Senate ticket. You can vote below the line. So should people vote number 1 for the Australian Citizens Party above the line, or vote for one of you guys below the line? Do you have any recommendations?
That's up to the voter, I suppose, to determine whether they want to choose individual candidates, in which case they can pick individuals from all of the different parties below the line, or if they choose us and we're let a seat above the line for any of your listeners. The important thing is we're not a party that's going to get a lot of publicity out there in the mainstream. We're not a party that's got millions of dollars to be able to advertise and put our ideas out there. But we are a party that is prepared with the policies ready to go, because we've been expecting this perfect storm of crisis to all come to a head as it is now, with cost of living, people that are tied up in mortgages that they're likely to be in trouble with. So we've got policies ready for not only for the postal bank, for the infrastructure bank, the development bank. We've got legislation ready for a moratorium on debt, so that people are not evicted from their homes, so that the whole value of properties and mortgages can be readjusted. So everything, so you don't have a crisis throughout the economy. So a vote for us, number 1, and then people can choose how they vote after that. It's only a number 1 for us that's going to count, and it's going to send a strong message if we get enough votes to the major parties that they've got to do something real to solve these problems.
Do you have anything to add, Kingsley?
Choice of the voter. There's many ways to express your wishes, how you want your future government to be.
And also a quick reminder to the listeners, so how to vote for the Senate ballot. Above the line, you have to at least number 1 to 6, and below the line, 1 to 12. So otherwise it will, if you just put a 1 and that's it, it'll count as informal and will be chucked out.
Thank you, Christian.
You're right. So how is campaigning for the 2022 federal election going so far?
Okay. Well, talking to people on the street and at a function last night, there was a lot of variance in questions, and particularly in the community that we were addressing, it's a Chinese Australian community. There was lots of questions from the floor, particularly centered around foreign affairs and how it affects, how it sort of stems from our community. And on the other hand, we're on the street in Chatswood this afternoon, and this is really people coming in and out of the station, and people want to know who we are, what can we do for them, and what were our policies. Know that there's a lot of interest out there for people to look at something new, and I think that's an indication that the answers are not provided. They're not getting the answers that they want in particular current times. So let's see how that reflects out in votes.
And I'll just add to that, where Kingsley's talking about current times, I think you have to look at the two major parties that are falling over themselves in trying to talk up rhetoric that's very dangerous over the Solomon Islands and what's going on in the whole Pacific region, what they class as our backyard. And this is something that we've been warning about, and the concern is that Australia is towing the line of the UK and the US, which is a very dangerous line, and we could be setting ourselves up in some form of a proxy situation, which may, end up in some major confrontation, which is not good for anyone. So our policy has always been for peace through economic development. Our policies are modelled on what the old Labor Party did here in Australia: national banking, building infrastructure, setting up institutions that would work for an entrepreneur type society. And, that was modelled on the American system of political economy in the early days. Now, the irony is that today it's the Chinese that are using that system of state banks and state enterprises. They're investing in building infrastructure, focused on, lifting people out of poverty. And the Western world, the UK, the US side of everything, is driving people into poverty. And instead of investing in physical economy, they're investing in a casino economy where there's more and more speculation that's driving, house prices up, the cost of living prices up, everyone's trading with water or carbon or something else. It's all about speculation and not about building up a real economy. So that it's a stark difference of what we represent to what the mainstream major parties represent.
Yeah, look, after World War II, we were heading in a direction where peaceful cooperation and everyone helping each other and building a better world. And then it's deteriorated in the last 20 years, and particularly the last 3 years for Australia. The decisions have been made at government level which affect our trade and investment. It's created a risk for us that everything we have is dovetailed with particularly our military and defence. It's dovetailed with America, and it's all very long range offensive defence policy, which ties us up in conflict whenever America expects us to join them. And we're going, Afghanistan. We don't go into Taiwan. Is ended up fighting someone else's war is not really in Australia's interest. So, but just going back to the economy, Australia used to be involved in providing a lot of foreign aid, and it's been cutting down on that in the last couple of decades. We ought to go back and form really sound relationships with our neighbours. Yes, we may have to compete with China, who's been doing the same thing, but I think that this is a far better way and a much finer way to go forward in developing relationships, rather than in engaging in a gunboat diplomacy. So look, if you're not with us, we're going to team up with America and we'll give you a bit of a push. Look, the last thing we would hate to see would be something like regime change in Solomon Islands. It starts to look ugly if Australia's engaging in that type of that type of foreign policy, which is very aggressive, backed up with military threats. So I think Australia needs to really go back to its formulation where it was building much sounder relationship with neighbours through economic cooperation. It's a far finer way to go. And I hope we can do it. So our policies is to have much more independent foreign policy and also an independent defence policy so that we can be a little bit more on our own when we need to. Yes, we can have relationships and defence ties with America, but when we need to opt for a little bit more independence. It's a risk if we don't.
So what do you have to say to the other candidates running for the Senate seats of New South Wales?
I'll leave. Anne, would you like?
What do we have to say to the other candidates? Well, probably this might sound a bit arrogant, but maybe it would be useful for them to look at our policies and think in terms of, rather than party politics, what's in the best interest for Australia and what's in the best interest for a global security. As you know, we are heading into a dangerous situation where we have another global financial crisis on our doorstep. We've got a housing crisis where people are going to be evicted from their homes. So we've got policies ready for that. What we say is let's work together. Let's get the policies in that are going to benefit the country instead of all of the politicking that goes on, which really doesn't benefit anyone. And people don't trust it.
Do you have anything to add, Kingsley? Or
yeah, we feel there's no need to argue our policies, whether our policies are better or not for others, and say, look at what we've got. And it may be something that can help you, and other parties to review their policies in line with what objectives that we're trying to gain with ours. The issues of cost of living and housing are two very big issues. The way our policies work will help those two areas in engineering infrastructure that can benefit the growth and nation building of Australia. And in turn, this helps create more revenue for the budget that we actually have operating at the moment. So we actually expand our economy, it expands our budget, and we can use all that additional revenue to deal with housing and to deal with cost of living, which is healthcare and education and social services. So we think that addresses a lot of the domestic concerns. And that's the mechanism to do it with. That's what we say. The other mechanisms, when we look at it, we're quite happy to have those conversations with other parties. And what mechanism do you have to bring about the housing, alleviate the housing crisis and the cost of living crisis? That's conversations that we're happy to be involved in.
A lot of the minor parties have got a lot of good points, but they're often more singularly focused, I suppose, not as broad as what ours are. And it's not to say that they're not important issues that they're raising, but you know, what's the top-down major issues that are affecting everyone today is how we're looking at it.
so if anyone is listening and is keen to help you or the Australian Citizens Party out, how would they go to sign up to volunteer?
Kingsley?
Well, we've got a website. Visit our website. you may find some interesting podcasts, interesting videos, articles. It's quite comprehensive. It's a pretty big shop, and I'm very proud of our website. And then the next step is contact us, and we'll come back to you and engage with us. And you may be surprised of what the breadth of the people that we have here. We're not a huge party, but we've got a great depth of people with experiences, and we're quite happy to talk about policies and how it can help Australia.
And I'll just add to that, because if people can go to our website, as Kingsley said, under election 22, they can look up the candidates. Kingsley and my contact details are there if they want to help with us, or the way that they can contact our individual candidates in the different electorates. But day one after the election, we'd probably take a rest on that day, but we campaign continually. We campaign to get the legislation in. We work with other parties or elected members to try and get legislation introduced into Parliament. We've had several, in cases, we've had One Nation that have worked as Bob Catter supports us. We've got the Greens that might support us on some issues, especially economic policy. So it is about working for what's going to be the best for the country. So we're continually campaigning, and people can get involved in that.
Yeah, that's what I like about the Citizens Party. When I worked with bigger parties before, they weren't like that, but this is very much a collaborative type operation where we go out, reach out with other parties and talk with them about their policies. And whether we're in government or not, it doesn't matter, because people are always interested in ideas and trying to develop what's actually on the table in Parliament. So it takes all people to contribute, and a collective effort's really a good way to go.
So who would the Australian Citizens Party prefer formed a majority Senate? Labor or Liberal? Or alternatively, would you guys prefer a hung parliament?
I think we should learn to deal with all of it. So whatever the results of the election is, I think everyone will react to work best with that situation, because I think that there's many opportunities in any of those scenarios, many opportunities to move our country forward. And as I say, getting together collectively, collaboratively, doors will always be open, I'm sure, with all parties. It doesn't mean that someone's in majority, they don't need to talk to anyone else. No, that's not true. Everyone's got to develop their policies. There may be some individuals that you probably can't talk to. That's the nature of the business. That's business, it's still business as usual. So no preferences as to how things would turn out. Now, if it is, however, I would say that if it is a hung parliament, and people talk about going back for a second bite, well, that gives people another chance to determine government or reconfirm the government. I think that's the beauty of a democracy that we're in. We should learn to deal with all of that. And when you see that there is a gradual decline of major parties and a rise of the minorities and independents, and I think that will continue. So that's my guess where it's heading.
Yeah, it seems that way. I've seen a lot of minor parties have put out the hashtag vote the majors last. So whether or not, I don't know if you guys stand for that as well, but I have seen other minor parties put that out there. So
it'd be nice if we didn't have the preference system and we could just vote one for the candidates or parties that we wanted.
Well, Christian, if you flatten the playing field, it's much more easy for all of us to get in and have a say.
So do you guys have any other comments you would like to address to the listeners?
I think that elections bring out the best in every one of us. not the worst. I take a very positive view about what's on the table, and make us think that the solutions we have in a changing world, in a more complicated world as it is today, facing lots of challenges, we are going to have to think outside the square to solve some of the issues in front of us. So let's play ball.
My answer to that would be that probably we shouldn't think that elections make or break the situation, because it really is citizens taking responsibility, which is our motto, getting involved in the process and holding whoever is elected to account. You know, people should be going and seeing their members of parliament regularly, keeping them on the ball, giving them information that you can't always blame the member of parliament for not knowing what's going on. There's so many issues that they need to be across, and they've got their advisors. And sometimes they're not aware of all of the details that they need to know. And we've proved that with lots of our campaigns, you know, where we've campaigned with our supporters going and meeting with members of parliament over the bail-in law, which nobody knew about, you know, that this was legislation that was going to allow the banks to be able to tap into people's bank deposits to prop up the failing bank. The idea is to prevent a bank from failing. So any of the guarantees that they talk about that are there, they don't come into play until after the bank has failed. The bail-in's there to prevent the failing. And then you've got the restrictions on the use of cash. You know, people took that issue up to their members of parliament, and that ended up becoming so unpopular that they shelved it. So it's how we have to think in terms of what we do to get the type of government that we want. We can't just think that we vote, you know, every 3 or 4 years and that's the end of story, and we can just whinge and grizzle and grumble about what's happening. We have to take responsibility, and I invite everyone to do that.
So, well, thanks for joining us today, Kingsley and Ann.
Good. Same here, Christian. And thank you for the opportunity. It's a pleasure.
So you can follow their party's Facebook page at Australian Citizens Party. You can also follow me on Facebook at Christians Political Talks, and the same on Instagram. Further details will be in the description of this episode. Special thanks to everyone who tuned in to listen to today's episode, and hope to see you soon. Bye.